I'm Todd Crawford,
I'm Eric Zavinski.
and we are too cool for the comic shop.
On this episode, Todd, we'll be talking about the currently standing John Wick trilogy, even though it is going to have more sequels in the future. But I think discussing this series as a trilogy will be a lot of fun. I think I'm glad you suggested it.
Yeah, I'm glad I am too. And I was going to let you take credit for that. I thought that was your suggestion. Speaking of a conversation we were just having about my memory before we started recording.
Right. I think our history is fairly recent with these films. Will and I watched this trilogy of movies about a year ago, October and November 2019. We quite enjoyed them. We had just bought them all on DVD because we had heard that they were excellent action films, and definitely weren't wrong. They were just really, really fun to watch, and we enjoyed all three.
Yeah, I had a bit of a different past of these movies. I grew up watching them. No, I saw each one pretty much as they came out. The first one I think I did have to wait till DVD because I was in college and just wasn't playing at that theater in that town. But the others, I saw both those in theaters. So I've kind of seen them as they've evolved, which has been a rewarding experience.
Right. They really brought back a sort of slick kinetic action to blockbusters again. I really don't know of too many modern films that film action in the way that the John movies present it. Not a lot of jump cuts, a lot of like intense focus shots of, Keanu and the other men just doing obscene, crazy stuff. It's really amazing to see that with the quality of what film is today, but with the style that's there to back it up.
Exactly. And if I'm not mistaken, and don't quote me on this because this isn't a news show. If you're coming and watching Too Cool for the Comic Shop for election updates, this isn't the place. But I believe that this was directed by stunt directors for the Matrix movies. Could be wrong, but I believe that to be
I
the
believe
case.
so. I definitely feel like the stunt man turned director part is at least true, if not that whole statement, Todd. I think it really does show. Because when I wrote my movie reviews a year ago, I looked into the past of their production a little bit, and I think that's just a really cool idea to have a stunt man with that kind of background making a movie, because when you look at it through that lens, that they're really obviously not trying to make a movie that is super profound or is like a thinker or a thriller. They're really just like roller coaster rides, but that's exactly what they're designed to be. And I think like the vision that this guy has for that, it's so clear, and it's just something unique, I feel.
Yeah, so I just looked it up. I got IMDb here, and it looks like they both did work on, I think, Matrix Reloaded. I closed them too soon, but one of the Matrix movies and a lot of other stuff that people are familiar with, like Captain America: Civil War, Hunger Games, Midnight Meat Train. So they were doing stunts for quite a while before they made these movies.
That's quite the pedigree. That's very cool that they can branch off like that. It's kind of like screenwriters become directors, or what have you, but to have another part of the movie machine become like the lead visionary, exciting.
It's true because it's funny because you hear about actors directing movies all the time, but you don't hear as often about stunt directors or costume designers or set designers. Sometimes special effects artists. They do transfer over quite a bit too, especially in the horror
Right.
genre.
It makes me want to see more high quality talent kind of roles. If these are the kinds of movies with such creative visions that you get out of those situations.
Exactly. One of my favorite stories about it is the second A Nightmare on Elm Street film was written by the mailboy at New Line Cinema.
Really,
Yeah, which explains a lot about the movie, including some of its the quality of its writing. Even though I do
a
enjoy
very
it.
different film. I'll give it that.
Yeah. So going back to John Wick here, I guess so we could just give a broad overview. I mean, when it comes to plot stuff, I mean, there's quite a bit of mythology in it, but they're pretty basic. Um, but taking it all back to where it began. I apologize.
We're talking about the plot of the first film, then.
Yeah, yeah,
And so I think it does a very good job because I had already known the famous setup for watching the movies. It kind of seeped into pop culture, and judging by how it did that, I think it has kind of a unique motivation where it's like it's a revenge plot about a guy and his wife, but it's impetus for John Wick to go back on his murderous man journey is the killing of the dog, which basically is a surrogate for the wife. But that's kind of creative as far as like action movie hero motivations go. It's obviously you know hit something in pop culture that makes it kind of a famous like you killed my dog. It's just such a John Wick thing. It just kind of like rolls with that tonally throughout all three movies.
I think what it does really well is that these movies really are kind of action comedies in a lot of ways. They never take the comedy too far, but we just recently discussed Scream, and I think as what Scream is to slasher movies, I think John Wick is to action shoot 'em up movies. And I think
Right, that's a fair assessment.
I think what made the hook of the first movie resonate so well, especially when the trailer dropped, because I remember so many people talking about it, is that it's funny when you think about it. It's almost like a parody of an action film where it's like, you killed my dog, and you see the action guy playing with a cute little puppy. It's silly. But I think that we all also kind of understand, like, if somebody broke into your home and killed your pet that you love. So it's effective on both levels, where you can buy it for as a plot device, and it's kind of goofy.
Right. I think it is that kind of goofy humanity that follows John Wick's character. It kind of makes him indestructible. I mean, there are several times where John Wick gets the shit beat out of him almost comedically as well. Like he's falling off rooftops, or if he stabs a guy in the face, then he might get a knife in the leg real quick and have to pull it out, or like he definitely gets the shit beat out of him throughout his journeys. And I feel like that's kind of a similar air of comedy where it's like it's not funny because people are getting seriously injured. It's just done with such a fuck it attitude. It is also kind of humorous.
Yeah, it's almost like watching like those wrecked videos on the internet where you're seeing something like, it doesn't even have to be
Yes.
something injured, but just like a tragic kind of thing in general that's like just so ridiculous. Almost like, you remember that old picture? It had a car and it goes off the side of a bridge and it's in the water, and then there's a truck with a crane that comes to get it, and then that tips over and goes in the water. So you have to get a bigger truck with a
Right.
crane to pick it up. That's kind of the same humor these movies have, where the situation just escalates and escalates and escalates, and it's impressive at a filmmaking level, but it's also so over the top that it's kind of hysterical.
Right. I can completely agree with that. Um, Again, that serves for drama and for humor as well. And that's kind of why I think these are really good blockbuster movies. Because like straight action movies haven't been blockbusters that often anymore. I mean, you have your action mixed in with the other, I guess, subgenres, if you will, the superhero movie, the science fiction movie. But straight action movies are kind of hard to come by in like the top 10 grossing movies of any given year. But John Wick is like it hasn't broken into that. It has tried very hard, and I can't think of any more popular action series, just straight action going on right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that these kind of movies, it's very similar to like the Christian movies that come out that usually are like very low quality and silly like God's Not Dead, or even the Clint Eastwood movie with the shooter, with the guy from The Hangover and the guy from Midnight Meat Train. I forget that actor's name. Bradley Cooper.
Oh, American Sniper.
Yeah, where these movies don't get made that often, but then when they do get made, you realize that a lot of people, especially in America, there's a huge audience for it, but it's the audience aren't the people in Hollywood necessarily. And this
Right.
does cross over with movie fans. Those other genres and kind of films typically don't. But with John Wick, I think it's a perfect crossover of like film nerd with the cinematography and the stunts, and just red-blooded American testosterone like football or something.
Yeah, right. I mean, because even Colton and I commented on on feeling like, man, this really is just like a man's movie. It feels good to watch because shit's blowing up, the action is slick as hell, and
The
I
kind of
don't
movie
know.
that just
I,
makes
I
you want
usually
lift
don't go to
weights.
movies for that kind of feeling, but that's totally what it gives.
Yeah, they're. I mean, for a film centered around a man grieving his dead wife with a emotional support puppy that then gets murdered, they're pretty feel good movies ultimately.
Right. John Wick is so capable, and there's obviously like an audience power surrogate there. And it's funny, you can talk and gush about the movies overall so much, but I do think because they're just like nonstop. You're on there for the ride. It's kind of hard to pick out too many like moments that are just drop dead awesome, because they kind of all blends together. Because I'm trying to pick out certain scenes in the first one to discuss, but less is coming to mind than I perhaps would have thought.
A big thing for me is I think the first one's a lot more grounded than the sequels. Like the first one, you have that nightclub scene where he's going through, and it's got like this like Nicholas Winding Refn-esque lighting as he's just beating the fuck out of person after person after person. Or of course the point where he's going through the house shooting people, reloading, punching them, ducking. But they're still fairly grounded, whereas the others get like increasingly cartoonish.
Right. I think that's part of it too. And like the cartoonish aspect of the sequels, it can be a good and a bad thing. It can help make it more distinct and more memorable. But you kind of lose, I guess, whatever sense of realism you had in the first one too, because the first one is still, batshit crazy. He's breaking the concrete safe open to get his weapons. He's tracking down this dude's son. To finish him off. And obviously, like in that nightclub scene, he doesn't. The guy gets away out of his hot tub. But yeah, like I think that club scene was probably like the scene where I was like, holy crap, this is top tier action.
Yeah, one of my favorite things, especially in the first movie, I think the first movie does this best. First of all, I think the structuring in the first movie is best, but that's not my point right now. One of the most memorable scenes for me though is when the mob boss, he gets the call from his son, who says that he stole the car and he killed the dog, and then he eventually says, the person whose house I broke into was John Wick, and the mob boss says something like, "Oh shit," and just hangs up. And it's like it's like an SNL sketch or something. It's like such a parody of action movies, and it's just so funny just to see it played out straight.
Yeah. Oh, and another thing that I love about these movies, and the first one's, deserves all the credit for it. Like, obviously, they're not speaking English, so I think they're speaking Italian or whatever. So the subtitles are like super edgy. They're not like Suicide Squad level stupid, but they've have enough stylistic flair to kind of further the parody.
Yeah, they look like fucking like the logo for like a Need for Speed game or something.
Pretty much. I can picture it now.
Yeah.
Need for Speed, John Wick Pursuit.
One of the things that this series does really well that begins with the first movie is that it creates this network of spies that's just always feels huge and lived in and just interesting, and you love learning more about the world with each subsequent film.
Right. I mean, it's certainly, an action movie, pretty simple, like you said, but there is that underlying lore, or I feel like the lore can just naturally keep it ridiculous slowly each sequel. I mean, and by the third movie, you're like on some Uncharted 3 Nathan Drake trek through the desert to like chop off his fingers so that he can like be absolved for his crime of like killing at the hotel. And it's like, god damn, there's so many rules to this crap.
Yeah, exactly. And each film has a different like famous new entry to the series that's fun. And in the first film, I mean, the first film probably has the best one in my personal opinion, with Willem Dafoe.
Right. No, his character is awesome, and how you're constantly guessing, what his actual aims are, until his demise at the end of the film.
Yeah, and the person who kills him, which is really rewarding, is he's not killed by, or she is not killed by John Wick. She's killed by just people in the society for breaking the rules, which I think really establishes the power and the structure of this underground very well.
Right. It's obviously going to have a lot of payoff beyond this first movie as well. And there's so many good moments in the first film, but I think like the car chase and everything that's going on there toward the end, that definitely sticks out. The fight in the rain and all of that feels like a very intimate, manly fight, compared to what we usually get these days in big movies like this.
Yeah, and one thing with the first one that's fascinating to me is that how it, like you said, it became this like pop culture thing before there were sequels or anything, to the point where we even had a parody film come out right after it that it's called Keanu, where the cat's stolen and it's Key and Peele going to get it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I remembered seeing trailers for it.
Yeah, same. And I don't think that's very common that you get a parody film just based off of one movie.
Yeah, no, that's very true. I'm kind of not surprised. I think Jordan Peele and Keegan Michael Key are probably really in tune with pop culture, so they're probably like, yeah, this shit's gonna be super successful, so let's might as well profit off of it early on.
Yeah, exactly. And it feels that way. Like it's funny because the first one when it came out, I couldn't really gauge how big it was. And then by like the time the second came out, I knew more people were talking about it, more people were excited about it. And then the third one came out, and going to see the second and third theaters are both like fairly packed. And just looking at the demographics of the audience was so fascinating because it was so diverse. It was like teenagers, you'd see like parents taking their kids, older couples. It just became like kind of a phenomenon.
That's really a good point. It kind of does have an all ages appeal, which I don't think that many movies, other than your obvious, record breaking movies, really have. I think another thing that's really cool is that the sequels came fast. It felt like John Wick never let up. And by the time a third movie came out, I was like, oh shit, this franchise is a franchise. Like, it's here to stay. Because John Wick 2, I was hearing good things. I didn't think much of it quite yet, because there's tons of, movies that get sequels. And, sometimes those sequels are bad. Like the horror movie genre does it. The action movie genre does it sometimes too, with just sequels for sequel's sake. But by the time there was a third one, which was also critically well received, I was like, okay, I need to check this out for myself. It being a trilogy that was all good kind of sold me that I needed to jump in.
Yeah, I remember watching because I always loved Keanu, and the trailer came out and it had that premise, and it has that ridiculous line in the trailer for the first movie. It's like, everybody keeps asking if I'm back. Yeah, I'm thinking I'm back, or something. It's clearly just so meta about Reeves' career.
That's very true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's corny in the movie, but I can imagine it's even cornier in a trailer.
Yeah, it's such a trailer line.
Oh, that's so funny. That's amazing. I guess, what would you give the first movie overall?
Well, let's see. Do you want to go letters or numbers for this one? Because it's oddly enough two different answers, like fairly different. Or you could go both.
Doesn't matter to me.
All right,
You
I'll
can
go
do
both,
both.
but explain it. So number wise, out of 10, I give it an 8. It's a fun film I could watch almost any day of the week. But at the end of the day, it is kind of shallow. It is paint by the numbers. It's a really good time. It's not one of my favorite action films, but it's a very, very enjoyable one. And I'd also give it an A for that reason, because I feel like giving it a B would be I feel like it'd be shortchanging it, and so would an A minus. It's just such a slick, polished,
Yeah, A minus.
movie.
That correlates. I think that makes sense. I pretty much agree with you across the board. I think I gave it a 4 stars and a half at best. Review these movies last year. John Wick, the original, is actually not my favorite. I do think the sequels are actually better overall. But that premise has to be good for anything to work out in the end. So I enjoy the original quite a lot. But I like how they expand things in the sequels. So I guess going into John Wick 2, I like how they showed its capability to introduce a new villain and to really introduce an entirely new plot into the Hitman universe, because he got this mob boss. He got this guy at the end of the first one. He kind of needs something brand new to give reason as to why John Wick is still in the game. And unfortunate, because like if he hadn't met this guy who he needed to repay for saving his life, then John Wick 2 and 3 wouldn't have happened, and however many sequels there will be after.
Yeah, and one thing I want to mention with the second film is all these movies have good casts, because we got Ian McShane recurring in them. We've got Lawrence Fishburne from this point on in the series, John Leguizamo, and it just kind of gets a little bit better with each one. As the series kind of gains momentum, you're seeing more and more talented people jumping on board.
Right.
And I think that the second film really benefits from that. Oh, and Common. It's fun. I love Common as a musician and as an actor. So he's welcome in this one. But it's really nice in the series, because you're seeing it start to develop, where you learn a little bit more about the mythology. You're seeing some recurring characters. You're seeing tropes now being expanded upon, and it's not just established, but like reinstated. And I think it really
Right.
is the kind of movie where it could make or break a franchise, like you said, the second film. And for the most part, I think it nails it. I actually enjoy this one more than the first. I'd rather watch this than the first. The only thing I would say is I think the beginning is a little bit samey, where like we need to find an excuse to get John Wick out of retirement. It's not bad, but it's not as effective as the first movie. That is my biggest fault with this one.
I can agree with that. The setup takes a little bit of time, but the payoff is really good, and the movie is a very steady rising action from like the first big fight scene onward, I feel. And really the set pieces just keep getting better and better, from what I can remember as well. Really culminating in my favorite action set piece in the entire franchise. It's kind of John Wick tracking down our main villain, but also all these henchmen through the glass doors and all the neon lights that are reflecting the characters in really amazing ways. And it's just so gorgeous, but it also makes you want to keep an eye out to see if you can see somebody's reflection and who's coming. And then they start breaking through the glass. Like, I just remembered having like an out of body experience watching that part. It always sticks out in my mind when I think of the second film.
The second also has my favorite action sequence, which is a totally different one, which is one of the fun things about these movies, because there's probably like 3 or 4 others that could qualify as well for other viewers. But
Right.
I don't think I've ever laughed in a theater as hard as I laughed as his fight with Common, when they throw themselves down like 3 sets of steps in like basically, I think it's a one shot too. It's just a continuous scene of them throwing themselves down stair after stair after stair.
Yes.
And then they're going through a fucking subway, I believe, or a mall or an airport or something. And they've got these pistols with silencers and bulletproof jackets, which the bulletproof suit to me is such a silly idea because it's clearly just want him in a suit because it looks cool rather than a big bulky jacket. But,
Absolutely.
They're shooting each other these little pistols and they're trying to be discreet. And there's pedestrians everywhere. So they're walking casually and then all of a sudden they just like really quick, just like, pew.
Yes. Oh my God. I remember dying at that point. Colton really gets a kick out of like that kind of physical humor too. God damn. And they have that cat and mouse throughout the entire film. Like whenever Common shows up again, it's like, oh boy, it's time to really pump this movie up with some comedy.
Exactly.
And that's what this movie kind of takes that to the next level.
It definitely does. And it's funny talking about these scenes because it's so hard to like convey them just like verbally. It is something like if you haven't seen those, you do have to watch for yourself to experience. Obviously, two people describing action scenes for you won't give you the same thrill. But
right. Otherwise, this podcast would be 2 hours long. There'd be no point at the same time. Like it is such a visceral experience. And it's really one of those movies that can't have been a book that was adapted or vice versa. Like this is a movie and pretty much only a movie. Quick side note, apparently video games can't even capture the essence of John Wick because there's this video game called John Wick Hex, but it's like this weird, horrible frame rate, like strategy game that looks like shit. And it's like, oh, apparently this is what they thought the John Wick universe would translate to gaming as. It's like, yeah, let's just keep it to the silver screen for this one, apparently.
I think you could make a good tabletop game, like an RPG.
It's funny that you say that because it's like, that's essentially what this is. It looks like a digital tabletop game where you're like strategizing where to shoot your bullet and like where to go, but it's like runs horribly. Like the official trailer for the game on Nintendo Switch was like, be John Wick, and it's like this super blurry, zoomed out, like horrible polygonal model, and it's like, nah, I'm fine. I'd rather watch John Wick.
Yeah, I could see it being like an RPG, like D&D or something, where like there's a society, and those are the game rules or the laws, and you make your own spy and shit like that, or assassin.
We could make that up ourselves. We got a D&D rule set, just copy and paste John Wick stuff on top of it.
That works. I've got so many RPGs in my head that it's so funny because I don't play RPGs, but my favorite ones, I'll make it quick because it's off topic. It's called Chad Quest, and I've been trying to get people to invest in it forever. And what it is you have like 4 different classes of Chad, and the tabletop is a club. And basically, instead of enemies, it's different bitches in the club, and you use like your different attacks based on the kind of Chad that you have. So like you have like the main Chad, then you got the wingman, then maybe you got like the chubby Chad, and he's got like comedic stuff, so he tells jokes and stuff like that. And maybe one of them's a good dancer, and then you roll the die to see if your move worked on the girl. And essentially that's the encounters that you would experience. And I think this is $1 million idea. So don't steal it, people of the internet.
I would play that game.
I think everybody would. That's my best idea.
But yeah, you could do that and just play as assassins with different skill sets.
In the club.
It really is kind of like a video game world. Like John Wick, maybe it's not going to be a good video game anytime soon, but it feels like a video game world where you can like level up your renown as an assassin. And there's like this hotel, which is like the hub world of the game. And you go out in these different missions and just mow down guys like it's Uncharted. Like it feels like a video game world.
Yeah, it really does. And watching it kind of feels that way too, in an odd way. It's like watching a competitive game of like Halo or something like that. It's Gears of War, right? Better comparison because the cover based. But one thing we got to talk about in the movie though is that John Wick has a dog in this one.
Right.
So that's nice.
Of course, they couldn't resist. Beautiful.
He has like a big fucking dog now that shoots guns itself, and everything, so it could protect itself.
The dog transforms into a gun.
Yeah, that'd be great. It's like the one thing
Hey,
too ridiculous for this series.
there's more sequels. We still have time for.
Yeah, they just haven't thought of it yet. We got to comment on
Right.
Lawrence Fishburne is in this one, so it's a bit of a Matrix reunion.
Well, that's very true. Funnily enough, I didn't think of it in that light, but yeah, I guess it is a Matrix reunion.
Yeah, and he plays a fun character. It's a little bit, I don't know why, but something about his character seems like it's from a different movie than the John Wick movies. I don't know how else to explain it, but it's still Lawrence Fishburne just like being charismatic with Keanu, and I still really appreciate his presence in these movies. And
Right.
he has a
I
whole
think
other layer to the dynamics of the world.
Yeah, as a character and an actor, he kind of like ups the quality of the cast in a good way. He doesn't like outshine anybody. He's not really in the movie that much. But he's in the third one as well, correct?
Yeah.
Right. And seemingly in the next movies to come as well. Yeah, they do a good job of expanding the cast. They give the hotel owner more screen time. You kind of understand what makes him tick. And in that same vein, it really relationship builds up until the end of the film, where John Wick is at the fuck it point and just what's his name, Santiago, just like shoots him in the head in the hotel. And then that is the turning point, I would argue, potentially of the whole series, where every assassin turns on him. It reminds me of one of the early episodes of The Mandalorian, where he breaks the code, so every other bounty hunter is going after him. And the same thing happens to John Wick, which follows him throughout the entire third film and perhaps beyond.
Yeah, and it's funny because for a film of such huge set pieces and such ridiculous action scenes, seeing John Wick just shoot someone essentially in cold blood is so gratifying in a way that like a more typical conclusion probably wouldn't have been if they're on top of the building kicking each other in the rain and it's storming and the guy's holding off the ledge and then John Wick shoots each of his fingers as he holds on. He's holding 5 fingers, then 4 because one shot off, and 3, then just his middle fingers holding on, and he's like, fuck you, John Wick, and let's go, or whatever.
They could have done something like that, but instead they go for a very minimalist, badass approach. Motherfucker shoots the guy while he's eating, of all things.
And I think it's the first death in this movie as well, is that way, because it's a woman, once again, in kind of a hot tub, and she's talking with John and all that, and then she kills herself.
Right.
And that's very effective, and it's a great visual where you see the blood just like go through the water. That's when the second film really had me hooked.
Right. And then Common comes in and they start wrestling. A bromance going on. You can't argue with me otherwise.
Exactly. He'll show up in the fourth, and they'll do my favorite trope of all time, when a former villain teams up with the protagonist to fight a bigger villain.
Absolutely. I want that so bad.
You can't get more cliche or more awesome than that.
That's a cliche that I always give a pass. That is a cliche that I'm like, yes, that cliche has stuck around in fiction for a reason. Let's go.
Yeah, it's funny because out of all the cliches, I can name one instance where they didn't work. For this one, never. I always want it.
Right. I mean, it's like I can name so many good examples. Like, Loki's the first Avengers villain, but ends up teaming up with Thor in the later Avengers movies, and until he dies. Sonic and Shadow and Sonic Adventure 2. That's probably one of the early childhood examples. I was like, oh shit, this is epic as hell. Yeah, and Sonic and Knuckles. I was a little bit too young for that train. I got on that train later. Yeah, no, it's definitely that kind of thing. You have these characters with awesome abilities, so naturally you want to see them team up, unless like one of them is like pure evil, because you can't get past pure evil. But if they have like different agendas and those agendas end up matching up later, perfectly fine by me.
Exactly. And that's the thing with creating a good villain, is that they have to have something overlapping with the hero, or at least the audience's morality. So to give them
Right.
like that overlap and to take advantage of that as a writer, to give them a common goal, is only maybe a half step removed from the actual plot. Now that hasn't happened yet in the John Wick movies, but the third one gets pretty close. It kind of does a reversal of that. And before we get to that, though, do you have any final thoughts on John Wick Chapter 2?
Just that I would probably give it a 9. I know the setup is not as effective, but I also understand that it can't be, and I see it as a continuation. And as that continuation, I do feel like it's like the keystone of the series so far, and perhaps forever. I just really love it. I feel like the really important meat and potatoes of this movie, the action, the set pieces, the characters, they're all taken to the next level. It's more memorable for me. So I would rate this a number higher than the first movie.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the setup, I mean, if there's two things that you don't want to mess with, it's a man's dog and then his car. So oddly enough, it is a natural progression when you think about it. But,
Right.
the thing with this film is that there is a bit of a sacrifice, a trade-off, because as the action pieces get bigger, as the universe gets bigger, it does lose some credibility in terms of feeling a lot more like a no, I'm sorry. It feels a lot more like kind of like a comedy, cartoonish comic book thing. With that said, I think the movie benefits from it. I think this universe is better when it's more vibrant and eccentric and weird. And generally, this is my favorite John Wick movie, and I don't think it's like leaps and bounds better than the first. I think the first, in many ways, is the best film of the trilogy. With that said, I think that the second's a much more entertaining movie. It's one that I would much rather watch. And even though I greatly enjoy both, I just personally prefer the second, and I give it an 8.5.
Yeah, that's very fair. It's funny because I thought maybe we would differ on this, but it sounds like for both you and I, Chapter 2 is our favorite, because this is my favorite of the three as well. Again, they're all very close, which is also interesting that we have this opinion because I've heard a lot of people, it seems like the fan consensus, that most fans like 1 and 3 the best and think 2 is the worst, but not bad, just people's least favorite comparatively in a lot of cases. But for me, I don't see that. It's just a really entertaining movie.
Yeah, I've heard that opinion as well, and you know, I feel bad for people. They're so fucking stupid. They would think that, you know, like
Yeah, how dare they?
imagine being such a loser. So for the third film, which is clearly inferior to the second,
Really,
it's
such a leap and bound. It's just there's such a wide gap.
But it begins with this incredible sense of momentum. It just carries over from the cliffhanger of the second, where John Wick's on the run. Every assassin wants to kill him, and he's just desperate. He's more beaten up than you've seen him in the past, and it's just
Right.
a really great opening.
Oh, this movie of probably all of them is the most nonstop. There doesn't really need to be any setup with Parabellum. I think that might be its one of its greatest strengths because, unlike the first two movies, you don't need to like putz around for 20 minutes to like get into the action. Like I think like 5 minutes in, you're almost at that like famous knife scene where they're throwing knives and axes at each other. There's one continuous take throughout this long room, and before that there was like car chases and other stuff. This movie goes balls to the wall.
There's a point in a library where he's like killing someone with a book.
Yeah, there's that too. Like there's so much going on. Like I don't even remember the sequence of events. I just know that a lot of iconic action happened.
And there's a great scene where he goes to the doctor and he's hiding, and he gets secretly fixed up because he's so fucked up, which is just a great desperate scene. The guy doesn't want to help him because he thinks he'll get killed if he does. And
Doesn't he have like doesn't he also have like the life debt thing going on or something like that?
Something like that, yeah. And I think maybe the highlight for me with this one in terms of action is the horse action stuff, and particularly when they're in the stable and there's like a bunch of guys around. So what John does is he like kind of slaps the side of the horse to make it kick. So when someone's behind the
Right.
horse, it kicks the guy to death.
No, like all of the stuff that we've already described is like within the first half hour of the movie.
Yeah, and for me personally, that is kind of the downfall of the movie, is that I do think it peaks in the first act.
Yeah, it's almost like a continuous movie from the second. It's so much. It feels like we're jumping from TV episode to TV episode almost, and like season finale of the John Wick season 1 anime was like the beginning of the third movie, and then they get into all this like weird shit with the other lady in the desert, and it's like feels like it's like this alternate world beginning to a second season that is like way more dramatic, and it's got a different feel to it. The middle of the movie is not bad, but it's got like a whole different feel to it.
Definitely. And that is honestly my biggest issue with the third movie, I would say, is that I just wasn't like the desert stuff wasn't bad, but it just took me out of the movie more than it contributed, in my opinion. I mean, like, it's cool having Halle Berry there, and she's got dogs of her own that have some cool action sequences, and we get that fun line where the dog gets shot, and Halle Berry said she goes to kill the guy, or she does kill him, I forget, and she says, he shot my dog, and John Wick's like, I know how it feels.
Right.
But
they definitely have the dog motif, and they weave it really well into the action. They do like a sting operation on a bunch of guys like at nighttime, and I just remember the camera like panning around, the two of them fighting, dogs jumping in and out of frame, and it's like they choreograph stuff like this is just beyond me. I feel like a lot of movies like Taken, The Bourne Ultimatum, like the later Die Hards, like all these action movies like do all these quick cuts, and I feel like they do quick cuts as like a cop out where they don't have to like choreograph as much, and they don't have to plan things, and they can solve it in the edit, which ultimately looks bad a lot of the times too. And then these John Wick movies are just putting everybody to shame, where they're just like the stunt people are getting their asses beat, freaking animals are flying all over the place, and it's like even at the second act of this movie, which is the low point for you and me, there's still so much to like marvel at.
yeah, exactly. I mean, and one thing too is, even though this isn't my personal favorite movie, the trilogy, like the filmmaking just gets better and better with each one. I mean, I think that's undeniable, that it gets more impressive
Right.
as they go, and they just continue to refine and expand it, where like you think it would get old hat by now. We're like, oh well, we've seen this before, we know what these guys are doing in these movies, but they just somehow find new ways to keep it fresh. It's like a video game series where they add a new mechanic each game, but the mechanic just works. It's just a fun addition.
Right. And each sequel might not be your favorite. I mean, so in that way, it really does remind me of like the Uncharted trilogy, at least the first 3 games, in which the second is the favorite for us or whatever. There's the desert in the third one, of course, but they do add these new mechanics, these new story elements to each one. Again, it does feel like a kind of that blockbuster video game world where you could be watching cutscenes for a whole lot of it, but also having a blast with the action for the vast majority of the time.
Yeah, definitely. And then one thing I do like about the third movie is that we get to see more of the hotel manager, and then the hotel owner, played by Ian McShane, and I think their dynamics with John is very fun and endearing.
I agree. I think that's once they start to return to New York and have more interactions along those lines is where this movie picks back up. The whole showdown in the hotel where the lights dim to neon green, and there's a whole SWAT team worth of guys rallying through. I mean, that is some super suspenseful, exciting stuff. And then like moments like that are also punctuated on either end with like the snide remarks of the hotel staff and everything. It feels very tongue in cheek and very much like the hotel is kind of this manifestation of what this whole is about. It's about like very spy level, high octane action, but also humor that comes along with that.
Yeah, and in terms of those guys who they're on John Wick's side most of the movie, we also get some interesting new villains. The first of which is I'm looking at IMDb, called the Adjudicator, which is it shows I read a publishing house, I can't even pronounce the words, but whatever the fuck that is, and it's an interesting
Adjudicator.
Thank you. There's a weird subculture aspect to this Assassin Underground where they have a ton of tattoos and stuff like that. And this is like a strange, non-binary character that's just completely devoid of emotion or anything, just pure professionalism. And I think it's a really interesting character and a good villain that just feels... I think it just conveys on such a good level the omnipotent presence of the higher-ups. Because we only really see the assassins and the hotel, but now we're seeing consequences being carried out by some larger administration, and I really like that aspect to it and that threat, because John Wick, after a certain point, he's like Master Chief. It doesn't matter, they could have tanks and an army and he's going to shoot through them all, but then you get a imposing force like this and it adds a whole nother dynamic to the storyline and the mythology.
Right. I mean, if you're going to go against a tank of John Wick, you need a tank that is like cool but very different. I think they step up the stakes very well with this film. And the interesting thing about this film too is I guess the second one is obviously very much of a cliffhanger as well. But this third one is just as much as a cliffhanger. Where he's stacked up against all of these odds, and by the end of it, he feels broken and battered and looking to Lawrence Fishburne for help. Then I don't remember the last line of the movie, but something along the lines of, I'm very, very pissed. And then we're cutting black. So it's almost like we're going to be getting revenge on everybody next film. Which it's going to be interesting to see if... looking ahead to the future, if they like jump in the shadows and then are able to go on the offensive after some time passes. Movie 4, we usually see John Wick on the defensive or going after one guy. But if he's going on the offensive, with the element of surprise, it's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, I just hope that he doesn't take it too far with the offensive and say like the N-word or something. But
yeah, no. Well, he's got Fishburne on his side, so that would probably be disadvantageous to him.
but no, the ending of this movie is it's funny because it is kind of shocking, because like as far as it was marketed, you think it's the last John Wick.
Right.
And so like there's a point where he gets shot multiple times and falls off a building. So you're thinking like, oh well, he's probably dead. This is the last movie in the trilogy. But
no, that bitch can't die.
Yeah, no. He also gets hit by a plane on the way down, and a bird shits on him and all that. His guts
wouldn't even matter. He'd still be fine.
He's practically Jason Voorhees at this point in the series. But
I thought you were gonna say Jason Bourne. Oh my God, that's Jason Bourne.
Yeah, that'll be the next movie. It'll be they'll do this, and then for the 5th one, they'll finally run out of ideas, and it'll be John Wick versus Jason Bourne.
So if we're gonna continue to give them subtitles like Parabellum, what are the other future subtitles going to be, Todd? Spinal cord, frontal lobe.
Yeah, neocortex or whatever. I don't know.
We're just gonna go through the brain anatomy until we've lost track, and we can't name any more body parts.
John Wick 4 vocal folds.
John Wick, Chapter 11, Sensory Cortex.
John Wick, tibia fibula.
Oh my god. You know, that's one thing that bothers me because I'm very OCD. So I very much appreciate consistency in titles. And John Wick doesn't have that because the first one's John Wick. Okay, that's fine. The second one is John Wick Chapter 2. The third one is John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum. What the hell are we doing? Are we doing chapter numbers or are we doing subtitles? Because Chapter 2 didn't have a subtitle. It was just Chapter 2. But Chapter 3 is so important that it has a subtitle, and it bothers me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I don't care that much because I think after a certain point in life, especially with video games, you just give up. And that's how I feel with a lot of the subtitles. Or like Friday the 13th, like those old movie franchises. It's like you go from like, it'll be like Friday the 13th Part 2, Friday the 13th Roman numeral 3, Friday the 13th the final chapter.
I hate that so much.
Roman numeral 4.
Yeah, I think you grew up with more movie franchises that broke those fucking rules. Whereas like I grew up like on Star Wars, where it's episode 4, 5, 6, etc. Subtitle. You know, it's very consistent. Or The Legend of Zelda, subtitle every single game for like 35 years. And it's like, then there's Rambo, where it's like Rambo First Blood, Fourth Blood, Fifth Blood, Part 3. And I'm like, what the fuck is going on? I don't know how many movies there are.
Thank God that neither of us was into Final Fantasy.
Yeah, at least they are, you know, they do count from 1 to however many numbers there are, but then there's like 10 side series. So
and then there's also different American ones are numbered differently than the Japanese ones.
Yes, but eventually I figured out, you know, what the truth was. So once I figured out the localization fuck up, I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, the Super Nintendo 1, 2, and 3 were really just 4, 5, and 6. We just didn't get like the NES ones, and like that's why the numbering is off in the West. So you just gotta look to Japan for the truth. You know, at least that's a localization error. Whereas like the John Wick movies, some guy in the boardroom was like, John Wick Chapter 3, it doesn't have enough punch to it. We need to add a 1-word subtitle that will make people want to see this one. It's like, why?
With Final Fantasy, though, I mean, you know that was fucked because the first one's called The Final. They have to wait till at least the game before they can do that.
No. I'll make that joke to the ends of the earth. It's a very weird name for a series.
But anyhow,
funny that you say that. I've actually gotten to Final Fantasy this year because I've almost beaten the Final Fantasy VII remake, which is completely unrelated topic. But
I actually played the first one in college a little bit, but I don't think John Wick played Final Fantasy though. They don't ever show him playing it or talking about it, or when he's sleeping, they don't show him dreaming about it.
That's a good point. Do you think John Wick plays video games?
Yeah, he has to. There's no way he doesn't.
What do you think he plays? Animal Crossing?
You know what? Yeah, probably something like that, because I was gonna say maybe Nintendogs. He doesn't play first-person shooters. I know that. You know how I know?
Because he doesn't need to experience that again. You know, you need video games for escapism, man.
Well, think about this. Imagine if John Wick was like shooting people, yelling about how he was fucking their mom, and then he just crouches over their dead bodies multiple times.
It would be really embarrassing if he was like bad at that type of game too.
Yeah, I feel like he'd just be a terrible sport about it.
Do you think there are like NASCAR drivers that like play Mario Kart and they actually like suck at it and they're like get way too upset at their like family gatherings, and it's kind of embarrassing for everyone?
There's got to be at least one. At least.
Oh, absolutely.
Tony
Soprano. So I feel like John Wick would have that same experience. So
Tony,
yeah, he probably just plays Nintendo.
Bad at Mario Kart.
John Wick bought a Wii, but just for Wii Sports.
That would be
Oh,
that's the spin-off that we need. We need some web shorts of John Wick playing with the Wii.
oh, that would be so perfect. Like they really should make just like little comedic John Wick shorts, or like they should make a John Wick animated series, like about his. Oh, they should do it about his original Hitman days. So
Yeah,
it's
then
like
you
a
could
prequel series or
recast
something.
and people wouldn't be pissed.
I think that'd be really cool.
Yeah, I'd be cool with that. And as far as the web shorts go, you could do like SNL or some like late night show could do it because like Keanu's got a history in comedy. He was great in the Bill and Ted movies.
Exactly. He's been everywhere. He's done everything. He shot everybody. Let's see, those Bill and Ted movies were just weren't fully accurate. Like in the real ones, like he had a gun the whole time, and most of the aliens like did not survive.
Um, one of the what this series reminds me of quite a bit actually.
So,
Kingsman.
yeah. I haven't seen the Kingsman movies, which I feel like I would like them, but I can totally see that. They do seem to have that kind of same self-awareness and the slick action and all that.
Yeah, Kingsman leans heavier into the comedy and absurdity, but like the way that the Kingsman is structured, like the organization in the movies, that is, reminds me a lot of how things are set up in this film. Whereas that's more about people entering that world. This is a guy who's already, of course, been immersed in it, returning to it. So it's a different kind of situation.
Right. John Wick, just the American parable of retirement. John Wick is just an allegory for retirement. How it's not going to work out. Your career is going to continue to fuck with you until you're dead, and he's got to fight the man. He's got to fight the system on this.
Maybe that'll be John Wick, chapter 4, because COVID's gonna last so long. It'll be John Wick dementia, and he'll be in the nursing home, and there'll be like action scenes in the nursing home where he's like shooting around old women using like his cane to deflect bullets or whatever, beating someone with it.
I really hope Keanu Reeves is making those kinds of movies until he gets to that point. That will be true ascension.
Yeah, I want like Harrison Ford Keanu.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if Harrison Ford can still gas around like at almost 80 years old here, there's no reason Keanu Reeves can't. I think Keanu Reeves is far away. That's still. Dude, Keanu Reeves still looks so fucking sexy, man. Like, come on. It's just he's gotten way hotter with age. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I don't really find men hot because how I see
Speak
things.
objectively.
What?
I do like the look of like the John Wick Keanu Reeves, like with the very well trimmed beard and the long hair.
Oh yeah.
Definitely like the iconic Keanu Reeves look now. Over his like Tricks days, I would say.
Definitely. But the thing is that like as a straight man, I have to consider that not only are other men, but they're competition. So like, as good as John Wick looks in these movies and Keanu, like it'd look better if it was me, of course, and women listening should know that.
Absolutely. I can definitely picture Todd Crawford like doing very horribly slow, awkward somersaults with a gun. He might drop this knife on his foot. He's gonna get into that other guy's face eventually.
And it looked great. It'd be.
I would watch that movie. You should really start like writing and directing your own John Wick.
Those
Just call it Todd Crawford Chapter 1. Parabellum. Lack of Parabellum. Because isn't that part of your brain?
Instead of
There's no
Parabellum,
balance.
I can just name it after whichever part of my body that I severely injure in the making of.
Right, but you don't injure that part until the end of the movie. So when it happens, it feels like it came full circle.
Todd Crawford, Chapter 3, Elbow.
My little elbow.
You know those face swap apps?
Yes.
I wonder if you could do that with John Wick with an action scene. That stuff. This kind of shows me being older. I'm aging because I find that shit so funny every time.
Does that mean you're old or young?
I think it means I'm old. Like stuff like
Yeah.
the Snapchat filters where it's like it makes your head look weird and shit. That cracks me up. It's like weird alien technology magic that I don't
You think the
comprehend.
kids don't laugh at that anymore?
I don't even know kids.
We're not even that far removed from our college years, but I know it. I my brother is 4 years younger than I am, and I feel like he lives in like a completely different like pop culture world, or not pop culture, but like social media culture, I guess.
Exactly. Yeah, I have a teenage sister, and she just doesn't understand anything. You know, she hasn't even seen the John Wick movies. She's talking about doing this weird shit kids do now, like studying and like SATs or whatever. That must be like the new LOL. I don't know.
LMFAO, JK. Oh God.
All right, so
Do you think John Wick will end up having a teenage daughter?
that would it's necessary. I
Like, and then
guarantee.
she takes up the mantle eventually. She's like 16 and doing all the shit, the same moves.
Jen Wick.
Jen Wick.
Yeah, I mean, let's be real. Like, if John Wick ever has a kid, and I don't see that happening, but if they were to go that route, they would not let him have a son. They'd be like, okay, we let you have your male action lead, but you cannot have a
Yeah,
son. That's not allowed in movies anymore.
there's too much sausage fest. Like, we need to balance the genders.
And then like the studio or the producer's like, what if he had a black son? And they're like, we can work with you on this.
No, a black son that became transgender and then was his daughter.
Now we're really cooking.
I think that would fill all the Hollywood social boxes, wouldn't it?
That would be great. In the bad guy is like some New Yorker with blonde hair.
So we can strike down fascism again.
Yeah, it would be the bravest movie. That'd be what it is. Jane Wick, chapter 8, Brave.
It's actually a backdoor sequel to the Pixar movie Brave.
Yeah, yeah. She used a bow and arrow because guns are for fascists.
Yeah, and then John Wick turns into a bear at some point. Things go downhill from there.
Oh no! What if they do the daughter thing or whatever, but John Wick becomes transgender? And it's like it's not talking. It's just a reveal where like she's doing her homework or whatever, and the door opens, and it's just Keanu, and he's just got the same length of hair and everything. They don't even have to necessarily shave the beard, but he's just got like
No, yeah.
makeup on and a dress.
And he could be undercover for all we know. That's what we would tell the conservative audience so that they don't walk out of the theater.
Oh yeah, that's Twin Peaks. That was David Duchovny's character on that was a character. He was an FBI agent, and he had to go undercover as a woman, but he found out that he identified more as a woman than a man, so he just becomes Diane.
It happens sometimes, man.
Yeah, I can think of two instances of that in fiction. That, and then in David Foster Wallace's book Infinite Jest, where a guy's undercover as a woman in a wheelchair, and it's just so over the top and ridiculous.
Oh, I think we've discovered that John Wick is meant to be the Caitlyn Jenner of action movies.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. He's got to get rid of this John Dick.
Oh, John Wick Chapter 20. Nicholas.
So, what would you give John Wick Chapter 3?
I was gonna say, I think
The
we just
pre-op years.
I think we just lost a few years on our life expectancies. Um, Great question. Probably an 8, I think. I think it's fairly close to the score of the first. I don't know if John Wick 3 is like the worst. I mean, these movies are so close in quality. It's like you said, it's like the film quality quality, is on a steady increase throughout all three movies. But there are just certain slight differences in the story and the pacing that really make or break the ranking for me. But yeah, I give it an 8.
Yeah, I would give it an 8 as well. I like the first one just a little bit more, but like they're really just kind of neck and neck, all three of the movies, honestly, because they each have pros and cons. And the funny thing is, the best thing about this film is the worst thing about the other two, and that's the first half hour.
Right. That's very true. And in that sense, the whole trilogy just it feels like a television series in a way. It just feels like the sequels are, even in the timeline, like they're so close to each other. I mean, it's just like one long adventure. It does feel like that, probably more so than most movies or most sequels I can think of.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and especially with the second one, as you were describing it, or I'm sorry, with this one, where this feels like the first part seems like a season finale, and then this seems like the beginning of a new season and introduces so many new elements after that. And it's
Right. And I hear at the least that we expect there to be a fourth and a fifth movie, and I guess really who's to say how long it might go on.
Exactly. We might get to see our post-op John Wick dreams come true.
I think we'll see maybe 25 John Wick movies before we're dead.
At least. We can only hope. I need something to keep me busy in the retirement home.
Exactly. I hope they're still coming out with John Wick movies when I'm 80 years old.
Well, do you have any final thoughts on the franchise?
Not really. I would just like to shout out to the Hollywood execs that if you were inspired by any of Todd and I's ideas for the series going forward, please reach out to us at Longshot Books.
Yeah, I'm retaining the mental rights of Chad Quest. No one can or Chad Venture, whatever you prefer.
And that needs to be licensed by Hasbro or whoever, Dungeons and Dragons, and get on that too.
If anyone from Hasbro is listening, don't take my idea. If Hollywood's listening and they want a more inclusive John Wick series moving forward, feel free to send us an email. And also the Todd Crawford action series. We're currently casting that, trying to find a good Todd Crawford. And stay tuned, lots of exciting projects coming out from Too Cool from the Comic Shop.
Yeah, I don't know how you can even find a good Todd Crawford these days, but we'll try.
Yeah. Well, I'm Todd Crawford.
I'm Eric Zavinski.
And we are Too Cool for the Comic Shop.